How to select the best tenant for your rental property. 2 years ago, when I purchased my first 3 rental properties in a single and busy day, I had close to no idea what I was doing or how things would pan out. I figured that I would learn along the way and work it step by step. Back then I was in no rush as I was still employed by Megacorp. As you might have read in my story, I soon planned to leave the corporate life, at least for a while. Today, I am still learning every day about rental properties. As you might have realized by now, I am ultra risk-averse and much more conservative when it comes to investments and money matters than most people. Similarly, I am dealing with selecting tenants similarly conservative and on the safe side. Unless you understand the legal basis for renting a property, you probably shouldn't. Once I selected a rental unit for purchase, fitting it out, and putting it on the market, I used to think the toughest job was done. It often took 2 or 3 months for a rental property to be renovated and fully fitted. The critical work, however, started when selecting the right tenant and making sure you get the paperwork done in such a way to protect your interests and your investment as much as possible. Overspending on the renovation, I have done that before, or being slow does impact your ROI slightly, but picking the wrong tenant can cripple your ROI entirely, so take your time. Listening and reading about countless horror stories, I decided to be extra careful, especially as I was emotionally invested in my apartments. No harm could be done to my babies. Having lived in Australia, Singapore, Germany, and the US, I noticed the differences in how various nationalities would go about renting out their rental units to tenants. Singaporeans, for example, will go down the effort to subtract anything of value from your security deposit if you leave the rental property in any other conditions that it was rented out to you, including counting the light bulbs or slightly scratched tiles from normal wear. Australians were ready to evict you if you didn't pass a biannual home inspection and replace you with another tenant right away, as demand for rental properties is high. A rental property often attracted 50 or more applications in Australia's major cities. In Germany and Poland, the tenant's rights are simply put insane, often protecting the tenant more than the owner. For instance, a pregnant woman or single mother in Poland who doesn't pay her rent cannot be evicted. She would be as untouchable as a holy cow in India. It would, in many instances, take years to evict a bad tenant on a standard rental contract. Thankfully though, if you read, understood, and leveraged the law appropriately, any landlord is able to protect their investment almost 100% against such pitfalls. That's why I spent almost a week drafting my tenant agreement, making it bulletproof, having it checked by notaries and lawyers rather than using the first template that came up online when Googling tenant agreements. So now the fun begins with the listing of your property for a specific asking price and then awaiting the market reaction. I always love this time. You get to meet the strangest of characters and some really good ones, but how to pick the best tenant? I am still refining this process, but here is what I learned so far. In a nutshell, I prefer high-income professionals, business owners, lawyers, and doctors the most, and I steer away from pilots, professional sports people, and models. I know I am discriminating and generalizing here, but giving your hard-earned apartment into foreign hands, at least a few key criteria have to be met, and as the owner you are responsible to picking the right tenant. Tenant selection criterion 1, punctuality. I have experienced well over 100 house inspection appointments by now searching for potential tenants for my 5 investment properties. Whilst the potential tenant is looking at the apartment, I am using the time to evaluate the tenant for a possible fit, often quizzing him/her for answers that help me gauge a potential fit. You wouldn't believe how many people rock up 15 to 30 minutes late for an appointment without an excuse. Chances are that if they lack basic professionalism and courtesy, that they will demonstrate the same character traits as your future tenants, or even worse. Do not count on the rental payment coming in on time and/or in full. Being late without a valid excuse is an instant disqualifier in my book. Tenant selection criterion 2, personal hygiene and cleanliness of their car. I typically wait in front of the property to greet the potential tenant. This allows for a quick glimpse of their car, maybe even inside their car, which indicates if the person is clean and organized, or not. Obviously somebody not well groomed, wearing dirty clothes, or using their car as a wardrobe and / or kitchen is giving away a lot about the person. Tenant selection criterion 3, regular income. Generally I don't consider a potential tenant unless they are willing to volunteer proof of regular income. This can be a bank statement over the past 12 months or the most recent tax declaration. Typically, I do not consider tenants that earn less than 5x the rental price. I myself have always paid a maximum of 15% of my net income on rent and believe that anything above 20% is living beyond your means. Having said that, I had people applying for my properties wanting to go as far as paying 70% of their take-home pay to cover the rent. It was hard not to laugh at them and their stupidity. Tenant selection criterion 4, net worth. I prefer the tenant to make so much money or have that many assets that he or she is able to purchase the apartment tomorrow if she/he chose to. In many instances people choose to rent over buying even though they could afford it for various reasons. These are the tenants I personally prefer most. The fact they could buy the place gives me the greatest confidence that if they damage the apartment they can pay for the repairs. Yes, these tenants are rare to come by, but I am patient and so far have found them for all my rental properties. In Katowice it takes on average a couple days to rent out a place, if reasonably priced. However, when I take my time in the selection process, and I always do, it often takes me 3 to 4 weeks to find the right tenant, and sometimes I even reduce my price just to get the right candidate. I know this will be positive in the longer term. Tenant selection criterion 5, security deposit/bond. To gauge if somebody actually has enough safety buffer saved up, or rather lives paycheck to paycheck, I always double or triple the average security deposit asked for similar competitive units. If a potential tenant struggles to double the security deposit, I typically don't consider any further engagement. Tenant selection criterion 6, rental history. If the person acts shady or evasive about answering why they are looking for a new place to rent, where they rented before, how that fared, or if they could connect me with the previous landlord directly for a reference, I would typically disqualify the person at this stage. I have a simple philosophy: you can ask me anything and I expect it to go the other way, too. If this basic expectation doesn't match, a tenant-landlord relationship has no foundation to be built upon. Tenant selection criterion 7, apartment occupancy. Occupancy rate, length of lease, and number of occupants have a huge impact on the wear and tear of a rental property. The more days and time are spent in the apartment and the more people live in it ongoingly, the higher the wear. I usually prefer single, pet-less, children-less, career-driven folks who want to stay at least for 1 year, ideally longer. They tend to spend the least time in the apartment and have little time to socialize at home. When they do have time to socialize, they prefer to do that outside of their 4 walls. My rental agreement requires tenants to designate who will live in the apartment by name and identity card. Any changes are to be approved in writing by me. Should a tenant want to bring in their partner or kid to live with him/her, this is usually no problem, as I will simply ask for an appropriate raise in rental fees due to higher wear. Animals and young children are generally not allowed in my rental properties due to the unpredictable maintenance load and cost involved. I simply want to avoid any hassles associated with renting my properties out. One of my favorite anecdotes is about a man who wanted to rent my 148 SQM 1-bedroom apartment. The apartment was brand new and renovations just finished. He wanted to rent for 3 months only, meanwhile put in a dividing wall in the living room to make space for his mother and have his 2 kids and dogs live on the large terrace in a tent. Seriously. I wasn't sure if I should call the Child Protection Agency right away or if this guy was for real. Turned out he was serious. Ouch. Tenant selection criterion 8, patience. Often I receive a call from a potential tenant wanting to move in on the same day. Of course the person doesn't realize they have just been disqualified when I ask them why there is such a rush. It's amazing to hear people being utterly disorganized, often starting to look for a rental a week or less before they have to move out, for whatever reason. For the organized people that get a viewing invitation from me, I often end the appointment with "let's both sleep over it and connect tomorrow morning about our decision." This gives me time to evaluate the tenant, connect with my family to discuss the tenant, but also tests the patience of the tenant, who often would be ready to sign on the spot. Based on the 8 decision criteria above, I have put together a list of my most used interview questions to screen potential tenants. Just asking these questions and gauging the reaction of the person gives you tremendous insight into a prospect tenant. Just a word of caution. Certain countries don't allow certain types of questions. Before using the list, please make sure you use these within the legal framework you are operating in. Cheat list: 15 questions to ask potential tenants. How long have you rented where you stay at present? What is the reason for you wanting to move? When do you prefer to move in? What do you do for a living? Would you be able to provide written evidence of your income and/or assets? Who exactly would be living with you, if anybody? Do you smoke? If so, do you ever smoke indoors? Do you have any pets? Can you connect me with your current landlord for a positive reference? Were you ever evicted or sentenced to jail? Are there any issues I should know about before I run a background screening for all the adults in the household? Have you ever filed for bankruptcy, or do you have any outstanding debts? Would you be able to pay the discussed security deposit at the lease signing? Are you willing to sign a minimum 1-year lease agreement? Do you have any questions for me about the process? Following the above criteria and questions to select the right tenants, I have enjoyed a full occupancy of all my rental properties since I started over 2 years ago. All minor damages have been repaired and paid directly by my tenants. To date, no tenant has missed a single rental or utilities payment so far. Fingers crossed it will continue to go as smoothly here on. Now some questions for you. What do you think of the criteria and questions? Do you use any other questions or criteria to screen potential tenants? What has been your experience renting out to your tenants? If you do not own a rental property yet, could you imagine investing in one? For freedom and to live your dreams. Your Financial Gladiator.